Hey, it's your host, AZ, and this is episode 129 of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. Today, you're going to get to hear from NSCA Tactical Strength and Conditioning Professional of the Year, Professor Bob Lockie. He is on staff at Cal State Fullerton. He is an amazing researcher and such a darn nice guy. And he's going to be collaborating with me on my first research project, which is going to be a survey. Shout out, so excited. Also, if you want to hear more from Dr. Lockie, we have the ISSN Tactical Summit. It's online Saturday, November the 2nd. I'll put the registration site in the show notes. You can get registered and attend from the comfort of your living room. So with that, as always, please share the podcast, rate, and review. And here is Dr. Lockie.
Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive.
For the PES conference.
Yeah, so I should be there, but my partner's pregnant, so and we're due at the end of January.
Oh,
so
all right.
so I'll be putting some stuff in with the potential of going, but depending on how things are at home, it's a maybe not. But if things are going well, then I'll be there.
Okay, and this is timely actually because this episode will drop this coming Tuesday, and then the following Saturday, you and Dr. Dawes will be speaking at the ISSN Tactical Online Summit.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yes.
Jay's a little nervous because he's going to be in a hotel.
He did tell me that yesterday. I spoke to him.
What is behind you?
That is my action figure collection. There's a lot of wrestling figures and Masters of the Universe and all sorts of toys. So all the stuff that I couldn't buy when I was a kid, I can buy now.
Yes, I collect things as well because I couldn't have them when I was a kid. So, so listeners, say hi to Bob Lockie. Bob Lockie, listeners, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. And also, you have the most impeccable collection of crazy socks of anyone I've ever met.
Yes, I do. I like collecting stuff. Socks, hats, action figures. Yes.
Yeah. What socks do you have on today?
I'm not actually wearing socks today because I'm in my home office. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's exciting. Well, I'm excited to talk to you about all kinds of topics, but first I'm going to be lazy and let you introduce yourself by answering 3 questions.
Okay.
First question is, and you can answer it any way you want to, who is Bob Lockie?
Well, the most boring one is I'm an associate professor in strength and conditioning at Cal State Fullerton. I've been working there for about 7, 8, 9 years, so it's been a little while. Spent 2 years at Cal State Northridge, and before that was originally from, as you can probably tell, from Australia. So I did all my education in Australia, did a number of years working at the University of Newcastle, kind of was doing more stuff in the sports science, strength and conditioning side of things. And then when I jumped over to Cal State Fullerton, started working in the tactical space, especially with law enforcement and first responders. And so, yeah, I guess that's the professional side.
And I guess I have to ask, what was the pivotal moment where you were like, yes, I want to work with first responders?
I kind of fell backwards into it, and it actually came from Mick Steely, who's worked a lot with Rob Orr at the Tactical Research Unit with the New South Wales Police Force. And he actually, and I'm going to show my age here, he messaged me on Facebook because he was visiting Joe Dula at LA County Sheriff's Department, and they're right next to Cal State LA. So he messaged me and was like, hey, mate, where you at? And I was like, oh, I'm at Cal State Fullerton. And he was like, oh, do you want to work with the Sheriff's Department? And I'm not one to say no to an opportunity. So I was like, oh, yeah, for sure. That sounds interesting. Not having no background at the time of working with first responders, but thinking like, oh, this could be a great opportunity to do some stuff. And then the following week had like an hour or so long conversation with Joe, and it just all kind of rolled from there, and now get to work with a lot of good people like Jay Dawes, Rob Orr, yourself, and do a lot of fun stuff, basically.
Well, and exciting news, I'm finally getting my survey together. Thank you for your input on
at all.
that. I appreciate that. All right, so now that we know who you are, what sets your soul on fire?
I like doing, like, my background is more in the research side. So that's what I really enjoy. I really enjoy the creative side, and it probably sounds nerdy, but I'm okay with that because I'm a bit of a nerd. Is like where you get a data set, you get some questions from an organization, and then it's just seeing what story gets told from the data set. And sometimes it's what you expect, and sometimes it's not, and other times it's, I think a big part of what I like doing is basically using this type of information to help support our folks working with first responders. And so that's kind of like, I like that creative aspect to it. I like the analysis, I like the writing, I like the story that you can tell from just having an Excel spreadsheet, which on itself looks boring, but it's like the numbers tell us something, and they might not always tell us what you want to hear, but they tell us something. And it's that process of taking that, communicating that, that's what I really enjoy doing.
Informing the decision-making process. I love that.
That's basically it, yeah. And especially from my position as an academic, it's a step back from everything. So it's like, all right, this is not my opinion. This is what we're telling. This is what the numbers tell us. This is what the data tells us. Now you can use it or not. That's up to you. But that's what it's telling us.
And this is where I get frustrated. So many academics speak at a level that is just not the typical firefighter or fire chief just cannot even fathom what they're talking about. And you are so good at telling that story. And I just remembered something. Ladies and gentlemen, Tactical Strength and Conditioning Professional of the Year.
Yes,
NSCA.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was definitely an honor to receive something like that. And considering the folks that have come before me, it's humbling. That's definitely that. But yeah, to your point, I think that's, in academia, we can get lost in that. Like, it's like, oh, we're supposed to do research and we're doing this research to impress other academics. It's like, to be honest, and I think I can speak for a few of the colleagues that I work with, like Jay Dawes, Rob Orr. I don't think we really care too much about what other academics think. Like, we are comfortable and we know what it is that we're doing. And the most important thing is, like, our research is not just research for research's sake. It's to try and help the end user, which for a lot of our stuff is the first responder. And so, I recognize that you could have firefighters, police officers who would look at me and go, all right, that's just the academic. And they'll be well within their rights to actually say that. So I have to prove my worth as far as, okay, this is why this research is important. And I'm going to make sure that I can take whatever data, whatever information we've got, but make sure it's actually usable and communicating that. And whether that's through writing, whether that's through presentations, like, you've always got to have that end user in mind whenever you're doing this.
I'm cheering in my chair. And also, I have to show you something before I ask you the third question. Did you see our lab t-shirt?
I did. I saw Jay, like, the regular crew we were out at the Chiefs of Police conference, and I think I saw it on the socials and we talked about it as well.
Yes. We are feral and ungovernable. Because really, when you think about it, all the other professors and their lab groups are doing their research in the lab. We are never in the lab.
Yeah,
We're always out in the field being feral and ungovernable.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
All right. How are you changing the world?
Oh, geez. I'd like to think it is from the work that we're actually doing. And it's, again, it's essentially hopefully supporting decision-making or sending, almost sending organizations into new directions, hopefully, because, and I think you can attest to this, a lot of first responder organizations, a lot of organizations in general will do something because that's the way things have always been done. And, when we're talking whether occupational, whether we're talking sport, whatever, that's not the best approach to take. And so it's like, but what helps with that decision making is, bringing evidence behind that. And so we've done a ton of research, which is hopefully showing that, just even on a basic perspective, it's like, you don't have to you don't train everyone in the same way. Like there are other ways in which you can actually do that. And sometimes it's with a baby step with a lot of that type of studies. But I'd like to think in that way to an extent. I guess I'm changing the world is just, producing new ideas, new research, or at least supporting folks who want to implement new ideas, to make sure that they don't think that they're crazy, or their organization doesn't think that they're crazy.
I think that was a great answer. And right before we hopped on, you're going to have to correct me if I didn't do this search correctly, but do you have over 300 publications?
Yeah, something like that. It's a lot. Yeah.
And many of those publications are in the law enforcement realm.
Yes.
But obviously today we want to talk about firefighting. And what I wanted to talk to you about the most is this concept of how fit or how healthy one needs to be to safely do this job. Jay and I beat this up all the time and we just end up getting frustrated.
Yeah.
So we want to invite some more voices into the conversation. Where do we even start?
It's a loaded question because it's, on the surface, it's like you want to be as fit and as healthy as possible on the surface. But, how fit we actually need to be is very different. And then it's also very different depending on what it is that you actually need to do. Are you working the fire grounds? Are you administration? Then those requirements change. But at the same time, especially, and that's this, Jay and I have talked about this where we started kind of off in the performance side, but now it's almost like we're shifting more in towards like public health, because now it becomes the health aspect, because regardless of the performance side, ideally you want to be a healthy human being too. But then what does that mean? Is it just the physical health? Is it the mental health? Is it the social health? So all of those factors kind of interplay together. And even if you're a physically fit human being, and this is some of the data that we've shown, especially in firefighting populations, you could be very physically fit, but still have high blood pressure, still, have a BMI that suggests overweight or obesity. Some recent studies that, one of the recent study that I still need to work on, that Chrissy Sanchez, who's doing a PhD at Oklahoma State, was looking at coronary artery calcium. And that's partnered with Santa Ana Fire Technology down here in Orange County, is to basically show that, hey, you could have fit human beings, but they're still potentially got coronary artery calcium, which is increasing their risk of cardiovascular disease. And so that's the challenge, especially because you can be fit, you can be healthy, you can be good at your job, but the job is still a job. And there's still stress, there's still sleep disruptions, there's still challenges to diet. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's a quick and easy answer to how fit you should be or how healthy you should be. It's almost like be as fit, as healthy as possible, because then that limits your chances of getting injured, getting sick, all those types of things. What that means for the individual is very different, potentially.
I know, isn't it frustrating? Because we just want an answer.
Yeah.
You mentioned Chrissy. So everyone, Chrissy is my lab partner. We sit back to back in the office. It's awesome. She's fantastic. But let's dig into her study a little bit, that project, because I want to loop it together with some work that South Metro Fire is doing. So tell us about that research.
So a lot of the research that, I've done with my colleagues is a lot of fire departments will record a lot of data. And the challenge is like having someone there that can analyze it, or even has the time to analyze it. So for a lot of organizations that want the assist, that's where we as academics can come in to help, because it's like, you've recorded the data, we can help analyze it and, kind of paint that picture. So within the research that Chrissy was doing, like I mentioned, we were working with Santa Ana Fire Technology. So they run a health and wellness program. So they do annual fitness assessments with firefighters, and they started doing and working with, I can't remember the organization, but they started also getting measures of coronary artery calcium as a measure of cardiovascular disease. What we took a closer look at within the research is to see whether or not the fitter firefighters would demonstrate, better, let me back up a step. So with coronary artery calcium, you get a score of 0 or you get a score above 0. And essentially, if you're above 0, it's an increased risk. So what we did was we split into those firefighters who scored 0 and those who had a score above 0 to look at the differences in body composition, see if there were differences in body composition, fitness, or anything like that. With the idea being, if you've got an increased risk of cardiovascular disease from this coronary artery calcium, you might have poorer body composition, poorer fitness. That wasn't really the case. I think we only had 2 measures of fitness that were different, a vertical jump and aerobic fitness, which makes sense. But at the same time, we've got firefighters who could have good body composition, good fitness, but may still have these markers. And so we also did a correlation between the two, and again, found very few significant relationships between coronary artery calcium, body composition, and fitness. And again, for me, what that highlights is you could have a fit, healthy human, on the surface, a fit, healthy human being, but they still have these markers for cardiovascular disease risk. And so that's the challenge, especially working with firefighters, is that, okay, I'm exercising, I'm fit, that's going to solve my problems. Not necessarily, and that's, again, to highlight the positive of that, these are firefighters who are participating in a health and wellness program. The downside about some of those types of studies is that those firefighters who volunteer to participate often tend to be the ones who are fitter, healthier, because they like doing it. So you may be missing some of those firefighters who might be at greater risk, but then at the same time, it's good that the firefighters who are indicating some degree of risk are in the program because they're in a position to get some type of intervention. So, yeah, that's kind of a long-winded explanation of what I was working with Chrissy.
Yeah, and it is so interesting because are you familiar with the pilot that South Metro is doing right now?
I'm not sure, but Jay might have told me at some stage. But
yeah, so they started, I believe, with 20 individuals. A number of them were risk stratified, either, an ugly EKG or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then they actually had some people that just raised their hand and said, "Hey, I would like to participate." But they found some pretty serious blockages mm-hmm. in LADs, and none of the people that were healthy and raised their hand, they had clean calcium scores, they had clean EKGs, but they still had like 80 and 90% blockages. Yeah. So it's like, it's coming from every direction. It's incredible. And I like to say, we just don't have the luxury of winging it. Yes, like firefighters cannot wing it. So with Chrissy's study is not yet published, right?
It is not yet. That's on the to-do list.
I know, so many to-dos. So what would be, I guess, the take-home message? So the firefighters are now hearing, like, I can be apparently fit and apparently healthy and still have an ugly calcium score. Like, what's the take-home message?
I think there's no easy answer, but it's any type of, especially when you're looking at some of these risk factors, it's a multifaceted issue. You're looking at fitness, you're looking at diet, you're looking at sleep. And in a lot of cases, again, from the academic side, like what's a useless advice I can provide is, hey, you should get more sleep. Okay. Yeah. No kidding. So it's more so, okay, what are some of the better habits that we can dive into? Like, what is something you can look at with sleep hygiene? What can a fire department do to actually support diet and something along those lines? It's a different, like it's with law enforcement, but one of my former students, she's working with Buena Park PD, and with her boss Marcy Guzman, they worked on basically changing the vending machines that they're getting at the department, so there's healthier options there. I think it's having someone on staff that has knowledge and training in this area. Like, I think that's really important because you wouldn't get someone like me to teach you how to put out a fire. That would be ridiculous. So why not?
You could.
I could. It's like, turn a hose on it. I think that's going to work. But if you're looking for health, fitness, wellness advice, there are people who spend years getting educated in this area who can actually help support and provide that type of information. So I think it's resources, it's resources for exercise, it's resources for diet. And I get the challenge here too, because we all know we should eat healthier. Do we always do it? Not necessarily, but can can we do it for most of the time? I think and it's meeting people where they're at. So it's not like, hey, you have to change your entire diet. You need to get 8 hours sleep a night. You need to get rid of all the stress in your life because that's going to happen. You need to exercise for an hour a day, at least 3 days a week. Like what are some actual realistic goals that we can provide for individuals to set them on the right path? And is there someone at the department or does the department have access to someone who can help this process along? Like, I think that's the other thing too. And not to get long-winded, but just to talk about potentially,
Please do.
No, just some recent research we dived into on the law enforcement side, but I think has great application on the firefighting side. And this is a step outside my comfort zone, but we had a student basically dive into some survey research to look at motivation, self-efficacy with regards to physical activity. And I think what happens with a lot of first responders, especially during the training academy, is if they're doing fitness training, if they're doing exercise, it's because they have to. Someone's telling them to do it. You have to do this if you want to get employed. You have to reach these standards of fitness in order to pass. So all of the motivation is external. Now, the problem is that once that motivation at academy is taken away, once you become employed, what's your reason for remaining physically active? And what's showing up with some of the data is those individuals who remain active are actually internally motivated. So it's part of their identity. They want to do it, all those types of things. But how can we actually foster that? And I think that's the important thing. Like, what can you tap into during academy where you can develop that internal motivation, that confidence in exercise, the skills to understand, like when we're talking about exercise self-efficacy, it's your confidence to exercise. What are some of the things that get in the way of that? Basically, time, scheduling, all those types of things. So how can we give you skills to know it's like, all right, this is what your work weeks are going to look like. Here are some strategies to fit in some type of physical activity, considering all of those. And sometimes it can, and I think that's important for us to know on the exercise side. It's like we can design a wonderful hour-long program, but if a firefighter tells you, it's like, I'm not doing that, I want to go home and see my partner, wouldn't be a better idea is like, all right, here's a program you can do with your partner. So when you get home, you can go for a walk together, you can work out together, whatever it is, but it's a better option than just saying, if you have to do this, and if you don't do this, it's not going to work out. And so, well, I don't have time to do that. So I think that's important. Like it's basically looking, okay, what are the actual barriers? How can we, if not fix them, but work around them?
Meeting them where they are is the most important thing. So important. Now I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about these calcium scores. And would we see this in the general population too? Would we see apparently healthy people with these calcium scores? Have you age matched and looked?
We haven't done that yet, but I've thought about this, like, especially when I'm doing my research, because all of it's health and wellness. Then I think about myself. It's like, well, what do? I work in an office, so it's a lot of sitting. There is stress involved. Like, it's a different type of stress. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not comparing working college kids to having to do what a firefighter has to do, but there is stress that's involved with that. And I exercise, and I know my diet's not perfect either. So it wouldn't shock me to see something similar in the general population. However, it's the additional stress that you would get as a firefighter. It's I can say there's some stress, but at the same time, I'm in a white-collar job. For the most part, I don't have to worry about shift work. If I'm working at night, it's a choice. For a firefighter, if they're working that's not their choice. It's part of the profession. So there are certain aspects of the profession which are potentially going to make some of these conditions worse. And that's not even considering the actual work itself. And I think that's the additional add-on, is that the actual profession is going to bring additional stresses on top of that.
Yeah, I think that it's all probably going to come down to sleep deprivation and trauma exposure. That's just my guess.
Yeah.
And adrenaline dumps.
Yes.
I don't
absolutely.
know. Okay. So in addition to the work that you and Christy did together, tell me about some other firefighter research that you've got going on.
So I worked with one of our former grad students, Tommy Ruvalcaba, He's now at Santa Ana Fire Technology, so he's a professor there. He's also doing his PhD through Rocky Mountain University. So we did some research where we actually looked at injuries within firefighters and differences in fitness scores and things like that. So that study is in the process of being reviewed at the moment. What was interesting there and where we kind of dived in was not necessarily to look at, hey, if you're poorer in this fitness test, this is going to lead to this type of injury, but rather it was to look at, well, there's probably a lot of firefighters who are working with some type of injury. So what does this then mean for their performance in fitness tests, and does that potentially influence what they might do at the job? And just an example, back injuries. That's a lot of firefighters are going to get that from the job, from the load carriage, and not surprisingly, it likely contributes to poorer performance in different fitness tests, lower body strength in particular. So if you're seeing that, the issue is, it's like, all right, if you're performing poorer in a lab-based strength test, how would that be reflected in the work, like on the fire ground? If you got to drag someone, like we've done a bunch of studies that show the value of lower body strength to casualty drags, victim drags. Does that influence what you can actually do on the fire ground now? The other aspect too is that if you have a firefighter that has some type of injury, there's a really good chance they're probably exercising less too. And so that again leads to the idea is like, if you have someone who is on staff trained in this particular area, they can design you programs to work around and hopefully rehab that particular injury too. So yeah, that was some research that Tommy put together for his master's, and I think he's diving into other fire-related stuff for his PhD. We also did some research with recently retired Fernando Montes through LA County Fire. So yeah, he did a lot of fitness testing with his recruits, cadets, and we dived into some fitness measures, looking at differences between those who graduated academy, those who didn't make it through. Very reflective of the previous research in that area, where it's not surprisingly those individuals who are fitter tend to be more resilient and can actually make it through training academies.
Remind me, because I don't think Fernando and I dove into it too far. What were those tests that were strongly correlated with not making it?
You're gonna touch on my memory here.
I know, right?
I think in a lot of cases, and because Fernando used a very specific battery of his own, which fit, like it made sense because, and I think this kind of came out with a lot of the research that we did, especially with firefighters, that a firefighter ideally needs to be an all-rounder. So you don't necessarily have to be exceptional in one thing. You need a little bit of everything to actually be successful. So I know he had a strength test, so he used the hex bar deadlift, very similar to what the Army used in the Army combat fitness test. He had the multi-stage fitness test. He had a farmer's carry. He had an Illinois agility test. I think there was a jump test in there. And from memory, I think the only test that didn't really pop might have been the farmer's carry. But from that data, it was basically anaerobic fitness, aerobic fitness, muscular strength. They're all contributing to basically a recruit's ability to graduate from an academy, which makes sense when you actually look at the physical demands. But yeah, I hope I'm remembering that accurately, because that was from a research paper we put together.
Yeah, I'll link that episode. And actually, Jay and I were just at a fire department this morning, and he was talking about, I think it was a study he did with you, but it was in candidates. They did the beep test and then push-ups and a few other tests, but like if they did poorly in the beep test, they only had X percent of chance of making it. If they did poorly in the push-ups, X percent. But if they did poorly in both, it was
yeah.
Was that in law enforcement?
That was in law enforcement. But I think the thing to keep in mind, especially, and this is how I got started in research in this area on the law enforcement side, and then we did some on the fire side too, is basically looking at attrition. And fitness is a piece of that puzzle. Now, it's not the only thing. There is the skill aspect too. There's the resiliency, but it does tell us something about what's happening. And in a lot of cases, it usually relates to, okay, what level of risk as a department are you willing to accept? Because you might have someone that if they do poorly in the multi-stage fitness test or the beep test, that they have let's just say 60% chance of failing academy. Okay, but there's a 40% chance that they make it. And I think that's the other interesting, and not to dive off onto a tangent here, but that's the challenge with a lot of fire departments, because I remember doing a presentation a couple of years ago where I was looking at recruitment and law enforcement. There is a lot of law enforcement organizations that are having challenges with recruitment. And this was just doing Google searches on news sites, websites, things like that. At the time, probably about 5 years ago, fire departments, there were very few. I did this more recently, and it's like there are a lot more fire departments who are now reporting recruitment issues. And I think it's pretty much across the board from police, fire, military, because the challenge is everyone's recruiting from the same pot. And I jokingly asked my college classes, like, who's reasonably fit, who thinks that they've got a relatively good working brain on their shoulders. Okay, if you got those things, most first responder military organizations want you because they can give, there's something to work with there. The challenge is for a lot of those folks who might be viable for those organizations, they've got choices. So they can go to college, they can go do other things as well. And so that pot is getting smaller. So then it becomes even more important as far as when you circle back to what you mentioned up the top, how fit do you need to be, how healthy you need to be. It's like, well, you might not be getting the fittest, healthiest human beings, but can you train that? Because if you don't train it well, it's not like that pot is bottomless. Like you're not necessarily getting the next person up.
And it's really intriguing. I've had conversations with one very large and one kind of medium-sized fire department lately in Oklahoma, and they're not yet having those recruiting issues. So I don't know what's different here, but I know in Illinois, it is a disaster. At my department, we were running tests several times a year, and we would only get 10 people on a list. And then by the time we went to hire, half of them already had a job.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a problem. I'm just gonna preface this with, this is a terrible, mean question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Bob Lockie, you have the ability to wave your magic wand and give a fire department 3 and only 3 tests to measure like ability. What are you going to do? Which tests are you going to use?
Oh God, that is a super loaded question.
I know, isn't that so mean?
I was going to say, my colleagues, we presented at a conference last week where we endlessly went into how job specific fitness is different from general fitness, and your selection of tests can vary a lot. So this is the type of thing where I'll say something and then someone could turn around and say, this person's terrible, he has no idea what he's talking about. Some type of aerobic fitness test, I think, off the top. And I think that is dependent on the population, because the multi-stage fitness test is great. But with older populations or less fit populations, it may not be the greatest. But something that gives you a measure of aerobic fitness, I think, is important, because it's a foundation for job performance. It's a foundation for recovery. It's an important aspect of health. So I think that would be something that's worth having in there. Some measure of strength. So myself, Jay, we use the leg back dynamometer. So for a lot of strength testing, it's very simple. It's very easy. It gives us a valid measure of lower body strength. I think that would be something that's super useful. And I guess I'm talking more general fitness, kind of foundation type stuff. So something to do with aerobic fitness, a lower body strength test. I think the leg back dynamometer or isometric mid-thigh pull, just something that's quick and easy and you don't have to worry about skill so much. I think that would be good. Shoot. Now what do I want to do? What does my magic wand have? Maybe some type of power test, a vertical jump, very simple. That's often used, especially on the sports performance side. It can give you a measure of readiness as well. So there's a performance aspect. You could use it as a readiness type of thing as well. It can give you some information about fatigue. So yeah, I think a vertical jump is pretty simple, but there's a lot of information you can draw from it.
I think those are great choices, but I know the listener, someone's going to send me a DM and they're going to say, what's the multi-stage fit? What does that mean? What do you mean by that?
So For some folks, it might be a flashback to high school. So basically, the multi-stage fitness test is conducted over 20 meters, and you run back and forth between the lines over those 20 meters, and every minute the speed goes up. So you basically run until you can't anymore. So from a performance side, like that's especially for recruits, cadets, very popular test to give you a measure of aerobic fitness. Especially within health and wellness programs, they might use treadmill tests instead to measure aerobic fitness. And then in the past, we've also used step tests too. So there are, you could do an entire podcast just on aerobic fitness tests. But yes, that's what the multi-stage is.
Okay, good. I'll have you back for that.
Well, just let me know so I can do my reading.
Of course. And again, listeners, that was just a terrible, open-ended, wide, broad question, but I knew he would hit it out of the park. So that's fantastic. So I'm a department. I'm like, okay, Lockie says I should do a multi-stage fitness test, some sort of like a lower body strength. So, that maybe mid-thigh pull and, the jump test. How much money is that going to cost me to buy whatever pieces of equipment I might need for that?
That depends, and it's hard to kind of pull up the exact funds for what that's going to cost. What I would recommend for those departments is that, take advantage of your local universities and your schools, because, if you partner with those organizations, they've probably got that type of equipment. And that's, we use that, especially with the Sheriff's Department. We used this when, a number of years ago when we worked with Fernando with LA County Fire. You will have students and graduate students who can also assist with that process too. So the cost can actually be very low if you have a good working relationship with a university. So a lot of the organizations that, I've partnered with, our colleagues partnered with, we might assist with collection of data and things like that. Sorry, my phone's going off. This will make it. There was friggin' Jay. It was Jay who was just trying to call me. Yeah.
Oh, we have a meeting later, and I'm just gonna beat him up.
But no, to get back to your question, for fire departments who are concerned about the cost of equipment, especially any type of exercise fitness testing equipment, reach out to universities in your area, because for academics who are interested in this particular space, even if they're not, what that does, it opens up opportunities potentially for internships, student experiences, things like that. So you can have folks that can assist with this process, bring equipment, and sometimes the cost might only be, hey, can we use the data to publish some research with this? And usually in those cases, all of it gets de-identified. You're not going to get identified. Individuals won't get identified. But then this type of data can be used to help the profession. Even if you're not comfortable with that, then the cost might be, can we use some undergraduate students to get experience in this particular space? And on the other side of it, it's like, this is really nice community engagement too. Like hey, we're partnering with Cal State Fullerton to conduct this research and look at the experiences we're getting for our students, and they're learning about what we need to do, and we're getting support from the university. So yeah, you can almost drop all those costs basically down to zero if you have a good working relationship with a university.
And the thing is, even if your local university doesn't have anybody interested in tactical research, or I don't know what to do, well, call OSU, call Cal State Fullerton, call Mark Abel, call someone who's working in the space, and we will talk you through it.
Yeah.
Because we kind of like that rising tide lifts all ships.
That's what I really like working in this space. Again, at the top mentioned I did a lot of stuff in sport, and from some of my experiences, a lot of sporting organizations, teams might be more guarded about sharing their information. And I'll let you in on a little secret. There are very few sporting teams and organizations that are doing anything that is truly unique. Everyone's kind of doing the same thing. But it's very much like, oh, this is our program. We don't want you to know because we want to maintain that competitive advantage. I remember the first NSCA tactical conference that I went to, and I was very much fresh off talking to Joe and starting the sheriff stuff, and realizing like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I should go to this conference and kind of learn some stuff. And one of the things that stood out for me was yes, there's competition. Don't get me wrong. I get it between firefighting and law enforcement, all that type of thing. But at the same time, it was more so, hey, we've got this issue. It was like, oh, we had that issue. This is what we did. You might be able to use this and have it work. So at least on that side of things, it definitely felt more collegial. It's like, hey, we've all got the same problems. Everyone's got recruitment problems. So what are we doing to actually try and reduce those? Or if we're getting recruits that might be less fit than what we've had previously, what type of programs are you guys using to try and get them up to speed? So it's that side of things seems a little different, or at least those are my experiences.
Yeah, it is so not cutthroat in tactical. So not cutthroat. I mentioned a bunch of labs. There's many more. South Metro, Fairfax departments are happy to help people. Tactical is incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like whatever, for those fire departments, whatever problems you've got, I'm sure there are a ton of other fire departments that have had those issues. And like you're saying, like I have zero, like I think I will tell you all about my experiences, what we did and, how you should run, if you were going to conduct testing, here's what I would do. And if you want to use that, that's great. If you don't want to use it, that is up to you. I think we're all pretty open with sharing our experiences because, again, yes, there's ego. Yes, absolutely. I like getting things published. But at the same time, it's like, what's the point of getting things published in a vacuum if you're not actually helping anyone?
Yes. We have to get this information to the end user.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to talk to them. And Rob Orr is the best. He is able to just synthesize that information and spit it out in a way that the military people give a shit. It's amazing. Yeah. Oh. All right. I have 2 more questions. You have time for 2 more questions?
Absolutely.
All right. First question. The stage is yours to give any take-home messages to the firefighters. Like, you get to say whatever you want to say and try to impact them like punch right now. Just pow, right in the face.
The simplest one, look after yourself. I think that would probably be the biggest thing is, it's a stressful occupation. It's a challenging occupation. And I get it. Not everyone wants to exercise all the time. Not everyone wants to eat a good diet. It is really hard. Like if we sacrifice our sleep when we've got extra work to do or anything like that. The biggest thing I would suggest is look after yourself because, yes, the job is important, but you're responsible to your colleagues. You're responsible to your partner. You're responsible to your kids. Like, do the things that are going to make sure that, yes, you're going to be successful at your job, but you know what? You get to take your son, your daughter to their sports teams you get to see them go to college. Like, look after yourself. That would probably be the biggest thing. And I know it's maybe not a big dramatic answer, but.
So good though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Here's the meat and potatoes of the whole podcast. Do you have a dog?
I do.
Oh my God, let's talk about your dog. Tell me everything.
All right. So this is, we've had her we got her earlier this year. So she's a German Shepherd. We actually just recently did a DNA test and we thought she might be a mix. She's above 90% German Shepherd. So it basically came about. So one of my students in my class, he was like, hey, do you want to adopt a dog? And my partner and I, we've talked about it in the past, but we're like, oh, okay, like why? And so there was another student who basically had this dog and he was in a share house and some of his roommates bought her off Craigslist, didn't realize it's a German Shepherd. She's going to get massive. So she started getting big. They were going to try and resell her on Craigslist. So the student from Cal State Fullerton was like, no, that's a horrible idea. I'll take her on. He lived in a studio and was like, oh, she was just getting too big. And so we basically adopted her and having her now, it's like, I have no idea how she would have survived in a studio apartment because she's got a lot of energy. Her name's Lego.
How big is she?
Oh, geez, she's above 70 pounds now. So wow. It's because when we take her out for walks, like she pulls a lot. And so this is the thing, like we both look at her and it's like, she's getting bigger and she's like jacked. And I think part of it's because every time she's pulling, like I'm resisting her while she's walking, she's getting resistance training twice a day. So she's getting very muscular. So
So Dr. Jamie Mraz, listeners, I talked about her last week too, but she is a physical therapist for the Army, I think up in Pacific Northwest. She has Belgian Malinois, two of them.
Yep.
They actually she puts weighted vests on them, and they do sled drags to just build their muscles and get rid of some of that energy. So let me just suggest a sled.
Yeah.
And she can drag the sled. What is her name?
Lego.
Like
the toys. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so excited. Well,
So,
it's really the Fire Rescue Wellness podcast for dogs. Is really what it is.
Oh, I get it. She's I took her out for a walk this morning. We did probably about 40-50 minutes, and then took her out in the backyard and let her run around out there. She's very high energy. She talks back a lot.
I love it. You are going to have to send me some pictures after we
I will.
hang up.
Yes.
So this is your marching orders. Send me Lego pictures and then call Jay Dawes and yell at him for interrupting our podcast.
I can do that.
Well, I have been looking forward to this talk. Listeners, if you would like to hear more from Dr. Lockie, he is presenting this coming Saturday, November, is it the 2nd? Yes, November 2nd at the ISSN Tactical Summit. You can register. I'll put the link in the show notes. I think with that, we can probably drop the mic. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's go ahead and drop the mic. This has been AZ and Dr. Bob Lockie. And we're officially out.
Thank you.
Thank you.